From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South, and I'm Jose Daniel Lopez. This Saturday, the President of the National Constituent Assembly, Diosdado Cabello, led to a massive demonstration from the Anzoátegui state. Thousands of people supporting peace, dialogue, and self-determination were demonstrating to give their support to the constitutional President of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro, and defend the Bolivarian Revolution. They affirmed they will not allow a U.S. military invasion. Meanwhile, Cabello rejected the opposition figure, considering the possibility of requesting military intervention in Venezuela.
2 or 3 days ago, the self-proclaimed said he was not afraid of a civil war. I'll confess, I'm afraid of a civil war. I believe that reasonable people, conscious human beings who have a family, who have children, who love their neighbors, must fear any war, but they should have much more fear of a civil war. Because civil wars end up being a war between brothers and sisters, between people of the same country.
People have marched in solidarity with the government of President Nicolas Maduro in Barbados this Saturday. Outside the United States Embassy in that country, they demanded peace in the Caribbean region. Singing Hands Off Venezuela, the demonstrators carry signs expressing their solidarity with their fellow Caribbean nation. Senior academics, lawyers, and social activists spoke at the event. The demonstration sought to show strong opposition to U.S. interventionism in the global South.
Hands off Venezuela, hands off Venezuela.
The question that we must consider as well, if Venezuela grew only bananas, do you think that all this invasion will be a consideration on behalf of the United States? But Venezuela has one of the world's largest deposits of oil. It has coltan, it has gold, it has diamond, it has water, it has wood. Venezuela is minerally rich, and that is the prime reason, as declared by the presidential secretary himself, gaining Venezuela's resources will be good for the American economy.
I would like to say, as General Secretary of the Friends of Venezuela Solidarity Committee, first I would like to say that I'm very happy to know that the government of Barbados was prepared to join with CARICOM and other Caribbean governments to demand that our region remain an area of peace, and that the people in our region will be in a position to live a comfortable life without any war in Venezuela. Secondly, I would like to also say that the Friends of Venezuela Solidarity Committee is very supportive of CARICOM position and its chairman, the Prime Minister of St. Kitts. We think that CARICOM have been doing a very good job in relation to this crisis situation.
We're here today to express our solidarity, as you can see, with the people of Venezuela who are facing both economic and military interference in their domestic affairs. We're here adjacent almost to the American embassy, and America has been the leading country in terms of interference in Venezuelan internal affairs, indeed in the whole hemisphere, hemispheric interference, going back for decades. I remember in the days of apartheid South Africa, Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan saying they cannot have targeted sanctions against the apartheid regime, and they're saying this because they were alleging that it would hurt the population. In the context of Venezuela, not only are they having targeted sanctions, but they're having blanket sanctions, such that the people aren't able to access imported food items or medicines, basic necessities. It's totally unacceptable. It's a violation of human rights, and we protest that most vigorously.
Also, demonstrators in Lebanon have gathered in support of the government of President of Venezuela, Nicolas Maduro. Fittingly, they expressed their solidarity with the Bolivarian Revolution in Bolivar Square in the capital city of Beirut. Some Venezuelan flags were also seen in yellow vest mobilizations in Paris. In a tweet, Nicolas Maduro expressed his appreciation of the internationalism between peoples. The South African government's support for the Venezuelan government is backed by non-governmental organizations in the country. They took to the U.S. consulate in Johannesburg to protest against the attempted power grab in Venezuela. Our correspondent Matuba Maktije went to meet protesters to bring us the details.
Forward to Nicolas Maduro! Forward! Forward to the defense of the Bolivarian Revolution! Forward!
In solidarity with Venezuela, members of the South African Communist Party, labor union formation and other social movements took time off work to express their support for President Nicolas Maduro.
Since the victory of the Bolivarian Revolution, United States has always been involved in destabilizing Venezuela. They have destabilized Venezuela through various means.
It is clear to us that the USA government wants to effect a regime change in Venezuela. This is very silly and evil, comrades. President Nicolas Maduro won the 2018 elections with a landslide victory.
The U.S. mission in South Africa said it would not comment on the pickets outside their Johannesburg and Cape Town consulates, but the message against U.S. President Donald Trump's intentions on Venezuela are clear.
There's nothing ambiguous about Trump. He's a right-wing imperial agent, and he goes all out to show it. To the people of Venezuela, we say solidarity from Gaza to Caracas. Amandla.
Speaker after speaker denounced Venezuela's opposition Juan Guaido for proclaiming himself interim president. He's been described here as a disposable tool for the U.S. and its allies. The protesters say the Trump administration needs to be stopped from doing what the United States has done in Libya, Iraq and Afghanistan. Matuba Mahlachi, Telesur, Johannesburg.
Around 300 people have gathered in front of the Venezuelan consulate in Sao Paulo, Brazil. Social movements such as the MST have proposed a vigil at the Venezuelan consulates and embassies in 6 other cities in case President Jair Bolsonaro tries to remove the diplomats appointed by the elected government of Nicolas Maduro. They say they want to defend the self-determination of the Venezuelan people and reject interventionist attacks.
We are 60 social organizations which have gathered here today to reject the arrogance of Guaido, who had the nerve to illegally appoint a woman who lives in Washington as the new Venezuelan ambassador in Brazil. This woman, just like Guaido, does not represent anyone, and we are here to defend the dignity and sovereignty of the Venezuelan people who live here in Brazil. I want to tell the Venezuelan people that we are going to be here, outside the consulate, resisting and fighting against these traitors who want to take away these institutions such as the embassies and consulates from the Venezuelan people.
This week, Uruguay hosts an international summit on the political situation in Venezuela. 2 meetings were held, one by the Montevideo mechanism between Mexico, Uruguay, Bolivia, and CARICOM. This group agreed on a declaration calling for dialogue and non-intervention in Venezuela. The other group, known as the International Contact Group, and backed by the European Union, held its own meeting and called for snap elections in Venezuela and for the government to allow humanitarian aid to enter the country. Our correspondent in Montevideo, Madeline Garcia, brings us more.
The European Union leads the International Contact Group, which is made up of 11 countries. The President of Uruguay led their meeting on Thursday, making clear that all proposals must be made under the basis of international law and of non-interference, believing that what's happening in Venezuela today can happen to any nation in the world.
The biggest dilemma Venezuela currently has is between peace and war. That's why we call for serenity with all involved and caution the international community about their actions.
Even when the goal of the International Contact Group was not to impose solutions to Venezuelans, like Federica Mogherini initially said, in the same speech, she went back on her words.
The goal is not to have a direct negotiation, but to join a democratic solution through free and transparent snap elections.
Snap elections and humanitarian aid were the main points of the final document, which came to be after a 5-hour-long meeting. Bolivia, Mexico, and the 14 countries from CARICOM didn't sign precisely because they refused to interfere in Venezuela's internal affairs.
Mexico can't support political interference in other countries. We support dialogue between the parties involved in order to find a peaceful and democratic way to put an end to this situation, without the use of force.
These elections are not part of Venezuela's constitution, and their proposal is in line with attempts at interference, which Uruguay tried to resolve right away.
The solution to the Venezuela situation can be fixed, as long as there can be talk of elections. We are not placing the limits, dates, or preconditions. I think this is an issue of Venezuela, and there is a line between interference and cooperation. We want to cooperate. If Venezuelans want elections, they have to be carried out. If they want to find out another way without elections, then they shouldn't be carried out.
Bolivia proposed that instead of humanitarian aid, economic sanctions could be lifted, ending the economic blockade by the US and the European Union.
There's a difficult economic situation, but we have to acknowledge that the economic crisis is getting worse because of the economic blockade that other countries have started. And since humanitarian aid is being offered, they should also lift the economic blockade that Venezuela is suffering under.
As the meeting was underway, several Uruguayan social organizations raised their voices on rejection to the ongoing group. Both the Montevideo Mechanism and the International Contact Group concur on rejecting military actions in Venezuela, even when there are differences in the subject of elections. They also concur that dialogue is the solution to solve the situation.
The international economic financial blockade on Venezuela has meant the loss of $350 billion in the production of goods and services between 2013 and 2017. The CELAC has carried out a study showing that since 2013, the international financial blockade on Venezuela has been the main cause of the economic situation in the country. In a country integrated to the world as an oil supplier, productive specialization led to a higher dependence on imports that are financed with oil revenues. Now to Brazil, where President Jair Bolsonaro has been suffering from pneumonia since last month, but he won't let the vice president take office. Our correspondent in Sao Paulo, Brian Meir, goes deeper.
Who's running Brazil right now? It's an interesting question. President Jair Bolsonaro went into surgery on January 28th to remove a colostomy bag that had been put on him after he was stabbed during a campaign tour stop in Juiz de Fora, Minas Gerais last year. Since then, he has not spoken to the media. And in a very unusual mood, when he went into the hospital, he did not turn power of the presidency over to his vice president, General Hamilton Mourão. Now, many people view this as a response to various differences of opinion that General Mourão has expressed since Bolsonaro took office last month. Most importantly, after Bolsonaro announced that he wanted to help Trump in the possible incursion into Venezuela, General Mourão said the Brazilian military will never enter a military engagement against Venezuela. Since Bolsonaro went into the hospital, his aides and his children have been tweeting for him. Today they announced that he's eaten solid food for the first time, but on February 7th the BBC announced that he has pneumonia, and the hospital postponed his release date, which was originally scheduled for this Monday. Meanwhile, after Bolsonaro and his Justice Minister, Sergio Moro, announced that they were going to try and prosecute unions this year, as Bolsonaro is in the hospital, Hamilton Mourão has been meeting with many of the nation's top union leaders, like ABC Metallurgical Workers Union President Wagner Santana, to talk about strategies for industrial policy.
We'll take a short break now. Join us again after this. Welcome back. Ecuadorian President Lenín Moreno has announced that he will delegate most of his executive functions to 4 of his secretaries. The announcement was made in an official government decree. His 4 secretaries will be responsible for the main functions of the presidency for an indefinite amount of time. Our correspondent in Quito, Denise Herrera, tells us more about the move.
A new decision was taken by the Ecuadorian President Lenin Moreno, who announced in official statement that he decided to delegate part of his functions to his close secretaries. Now, the General Secretary of the Presidency, Juan Antonio Briones, will be the authority responsible of the Presidency. Also, the Interior Minister, Maria Paula Romo, and the Secretary of Communication, Andrés Michelena, and the General Secretary, Juan Sebastián Rondán, and the authorities who will be responsible of the main functions inside the presidency. Until now, President Lenin Moreno didn't say why he is taking this decision, so we have to wait. We have to wait if he said something in the coming days.
Within the needs for that report, and workers from Ecuador's public telecommunications company have called for a protest next week to demand better rights. Workers of the National Telecommunications Corporation announced there will be marches across the country starting on February 13. They want the government to pass a bill for compensation and labor stability.
We are demanding at a national level for the government to pass the bill, and we are very concerned about the instability of our jobs, because negotiations aren't constitutional, and government companies cannot be sold or negotiated.
Entonces, nuestra postura.
As CNT workers, as employees, as colleagues, and as citizens, we are concerned because today we have money and could be hungry tomorrow. Today it begins with CNT, and they are putting at risk the strategic sectors.
Chile is struggling with forest fire in the southern region of Araucanía, and the government has stepped up its efforts. A supertanker plane, soldiers, and members of the National Forest Corporation have all been deployed to combat fires. Around 13,000 hectares have been burned this week. The government has declared a state of emergency in some parts of the country. Another journalist has been murdered in Mexico. Jesus Chuchín Ramos Rodriguez was killed on Saturday in the Emiliano Zapata municipality in the state of Tabasco. He was shot 8 times by an unidentified person while eating breakfast. This is the 4th journalist killed since President Manuel López Obrador took office last December. In the province of Jujuy in the north of Argentina, indigenous communities are fighting for their territorial rights. Businesses from the tourist industry are trying to displace them in order to build hotels in the area.
In 2014, Argentina recognized the rights of the current indigenous Cueva del Inca community in Tilcara. Nonetheless, a year later, after a person claimed to be the owner of the land, a judge issued a precautionary measure against the inhabitants of the territory.
Almost 4 years ago, you couldn't even pick up a rock or build a bathroom. We couldn't expand our house. We weren't able to work in the tourism sector.
Tilcara is part of the Humahuaca Creek. In 2003, it was declared as World Heritage Site by UNESCO.
I know there's a lot of economic power with the government, the judiciary. The only thing we are asking for is to live in peace, to live in our own territory, with our culture and our customs.
The ancestors of Elvira Benicio occupied these territories before there was water or electricity.
I don't understand these laws or these judges. Before, nobody owned a territory, and now all of a sudden someone says they own this land. This law is wrong.
After a fight that lasted for years, the community achieved the judicial decision to lift the precautionary measure against them, with women leading the way.
We, the women that live at this time in history, have had to be in charge of this community. We have had to leave the comfort of our homes and give interviews, read, and face the current government and the police.
In spite of the court decision, the police continue harassing the community. Hotel operators are also threatening new lawsuits against them, but they are willing to fight for their land.
Time for a second break. We'll be back in a minute. Welcome back. Former Ivorian rebel Guillaume Soro has left his role as the head of the National Assembly. He said he was stepping down for the sake of peace in Ivory Coast. There are suggestions that he may have presidential ambitions for the forthcoming 2020 elections. He led an insurgency that split the West African nation for almost a decade, and served as prime minister in a government of national unity between 2007 and 2012.
Dear colleagues, I am now stepping down from my position as the President of the National Assembly of the Ivory Coast. Yes, I decided to sacrifice my job for peace for the Ivory Coast.
Military personnel from 15 countries completed a training exercise off the northern coast of Mozambique last week. The exercise held from January 30 to February 6 aimed to improve coordination against drug smuggling, human trafficking, and illegal fishing, which allegedly found extremists in East Africa and the Indian Ocean. The training exercise comes at a time when suspected jihadists killed 7 men and abducted 4 women in northern Mozambique on Friday. South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa has delivered his final State of the Nation address before the country goes to the polls in May. The economy was the primary focus of his speech.
For the country to succeed and for all to benefit, President Cyril Ramaphosa identified 5 urgent tasks.
Firstly, we must accelerate inclusive growth and job creation. Secondly, our history demands that we should improve the education system and develop the skills that we need on how we move into the future. Thirdly, we are duty-bound to improve the conditions of the life of South Africans, especially poor South Africans in our country.
He added that his government was already stepping up the fight against corruption and state capture. He said they were also working on fast-tracking the land reform process, which included expropriation without compensation. The president's speech received mixed reactions.
What limits the president is the fact that he has a party that is corrupt. What limits the president is that he's going to run out of money. And what's more crucial is that the biggest game changer this year is the 8th of May when we remove this government.
We welcome the State of the Nation address by the president. It gives hope to all of us as South Africans, in particular as trade union movement, because he focused on the economy and he spoke about an inclusive economy.
The State of the Nation address was quite precise in addressing the critical challenge facing South Africa, the challenge of jobs and economy that is not growing, the rate of unemployment and deepening poverty, and he has put forward concrete plans to turn around that situation.
South Africans will go to the polls on May the 8th this year. Aisha Ismail, Telesu, Cape Town.
Nigerian voters have shown their displeasure after facing difficulties in registering for elections. With only a week left before general elections are held, many potential voters failed to collect identification cards needed to cast their ballots. People have accused election officials of sabotage. Nigeria goes to the polls on February 16th.
Then I came like 4 times before now, and they now told me that we should come after the election. And being after the election is going to be 2023. So how can they say that we should come to 2023 to collect it? So probably they want to rig the election. They don't want everybody to vote.
United States Border Patrol agents have detained at least 326 Central American migrants on the Arizona-Mexico border. Among the detainees are 150 children, 32 of whom were traveling without any parent or guardian. Over 200 people in the group are from Guatemala. And before we end the show, make sure you tune in every Sunday for a new original documentary series by Telesur called After War. The series recounts the impact that United States interventions have had in at least 12 countries across the world.
So no, the war is not finished, absolutely not. So they can try this book and they cancel it.
And we come to the end of this news brief. You can find this and many other stories in our website at telesurenglish.net. And don't forget to follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Jose Daniel Lopez. Thank you for watching.